Hi everyone, Steve from the Audiophiles. Welcome to my weekly Mobile Fidelity Analogue Productions Audiophile Roundtable discussion and news for the week. We're going to get into it. I've got Jamie Howarth from the Plangent Processes talking about DSD, digital, the whole DSD debate. I got Michael Trochalakis, who's a big time poster on the different audiophile forums. He's going to be on the show as well, so stay tuned for that. If you haven't, please subscribe to my channel. It helps me out a lot. Hope you're enjoying the content. Much more to come in the future. Guys, let's get to it. We'll see you on the other side of the Audiophiles. Hi everyone, Steve Westman. Welcome to the Audiophiles. I have two wonderful guests today. Michael Trochalakis. He's a big time poster on the different audiophile forums, the MoFi sites, Facebook sites, that type of thing. And I got another special guest here, Jamie Howarth from the Plangent Processes. Jamie, hello. How are you?
How you doing?
Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me, guys, today. This is going to be a fun one. I know there's a lot going on in the audiophile, world. Lots of news, lots of news over the digital versus analog tapes, the MoFi stuff. Michael will talk about, I think first, Analogue Productions yesterday or this morning or last night posted their latest UHQR pressing, the Katy Lied by Steely Dan, and then pulled it off their website. And from what I can tell, talking to Analogue Productions, it's not going back on the website. So I'm not sure what's happening there.
Yeah, I ordered it, and a couple other people did also. And I guess we got an email in the morning saying that it's not happening.
It's not happening. I triple confirmed with Analogue Productions, and I can tell you this: it's not happening. It's not coming back up on the website.
That's painful to hear.
It's not my favorite Steely Dan album. I was actually hoping that Asia would be their next UHQR. Maybe that's what it will be. That would be incredible if that was to happen.
One of my objections on the vinyl craze, as it were, the vinyl commitment is that it makes it very, very economically difficult for those of us who do high quality digital to actually get that done. Because the digital ends up being done as an afterthought by the mastering shop that does the lacquer. And I think that's unfortunate. We've spent a lot of time, energy, and commitment to tape to digital playback that is specifically taped to digital playback. And when I hear that Elliot or Roger Nichols was a mentor of mine, and when I hear that there's yet another reissue of any of these titles, it just it's a little bit heartbreaking, because I know very well that we would love to, anytime, any place, have a piece of that. Mark Pincus, we worked for a lot at Rhino, and he, I think, did the last set of reissues that Warner did some time back, but that was a hell of a long time ago. So the independents being able to license those titles specifically for vinyl, which is the only way you can license anything these days. If I were to try to license any of those titles for digital by Legacy or Warner or UMG, I'd be turned down.
So Jamie, tell me why. Why has that happened? Is it a demand thing? It's more demand for vinyl right now than the CD or the SACD?
I think it's a couple of things, and some of them are inside baseball subtle. One is that because of the fear of bootlegging, there was an old joke about Damn the Torpedoes, which was heavily bootlegged in the New York area, and some kid at one of the mastering studios, and I won't say which, but we all knew, had managed to pirate a tape out to one of the mobbed up pressing plants, who pressed a bunch of Damn the Torpedoes with a good 4-color rendition of the album cover, and the joke was that it shipped gold and came back platinum. So I think one of the reasons that the SACD they're amenable to that is that it's obscure enough and it's such a small enough sliver that nobody's going to. I think one of the things that might be interesting about the idea that the DSD is completely transparent means that, then the boots that come from the DSDs or the DSF files, it's pretty fucking close to the master, boys.
So let me stop you there. So DSD, I mean, that's the big argument on the different forums. I know you've been part of the argument as well in different Facebook forums. DSD is archival, pretty much master tape to DSD. You're not going to be hearing much of a difference. Is the argument from your point of view? Yeah,
that's the argument. I do think that the fact that you do hear a difference with vinyl is one of the reasons, and also that they manufacture the vinyl. I was going back to the idea of the bootlegging, is that the labels actually manufacture, in most cases, they're actually the ones who are manufacturing for the classic records or the acoustic sounds. I don't know specifically what they do, but I know who those guys do. But I know that there's a component in the manufacturing that the labels are still very heavily invested in, which is partly because I don't think they want the bootlegging aspect of it, so they control where the boxes are coming from, who the boxes are going to, and so on. That's still in play. As far as the DSD versus the archival part of it, I don't know where do you want to go with that, Steve? Where do you want to?
I have a question for him. Do you mind?
Yeah, go ahead, Michael. Yeah,
Jamie, what about? I've read and I've heard Kevin Gray say that there is noise around 40 to 60 kilohertz with DSD.
Yeah.
And I even saw you post that it blew out the Bryston amps that Sony showcased.
Actually, it didn't blow them out. They thermaled out when they saw
they overheated, right?
Yeah, they overheated. Yeah.
So there is something going on.
It's above. It's how it. It's one of the ways that it got around the fact that back. Okay. The reason, one of the things that not many people know these days is that almost everything you listen to, whether it's PCM or DSD, is actually derived from a 5-bit A to D converter. It's not 1-bit. Originally, DSD was 1-bit because the idea was that if you had one single step size and you flew that really fast, that was a lot safer than having a ladder of 16 or 24 step sizes that were not really, look, the bit switching between 14, 15, 16, 13, 14, that's one of the reasons that digital sounded so bad, mostly on the playback side, because the lower bits were really indeterminate. You couldn't figure out where they were at. And the dithering the shit out of them didn't make any difference. They were actually bit 13 and 15 or 14. The resistor values at those very small microvolt levels was just impossible. So, all right, well, we'll make one step and we'll fly that really fast, and then we'll round it off, and it's a serial data stream. And where's your noise? Well, the noise actually is every single one of those switching junctions creates noise. And how did they work with it? Well, they upshifted it. They were able to upsample such that the noise would land at about 60 kilohertz, actually, is where it is in 64 DSD, and it's 120, which is a headache for me because that's where a 3M bias is at 128, and at 256. You're up at 240. I don't know. I talked to the guy that merging. They use a 5-bit. They use a 5-bit converter. It's not DSD. It's 5-bit that is submultiplied to 1-bit, or submultiplied to 24-bit, or submultiplied to 32-bit, or 16, depending on which radio button you push with your mouse. So the reason that's a good thing is that 5 steps, 5 steps, 5 resistors, 5 linearity steps, that's easy. It's way easier than 16. It's way easier than 24. So you've got a reliable sigma delta converter that's actually creating all of these streams. When you go to the 1-bit, you end up with a shitload of noise. When you go to PCM at those higher rates, you're still gaining the advantages of it having been a DSD conversion. So this is another thing how long did I run? That took 3 minutes. And imagine trying to type that. So we should get you on these things more often. It'll save a lot of time, and your fingers will thank us as well. Yeah, exactly. But that's one of the things that, like, when you say the noise shaping, the noise shaping it could potentially cause all kinds of intermodulation products.
So here's a question for you too. So the noise shaping, so in Mobile Fidelity, they do the 4-time sample and then down sample again, right? Is there going to be some noise shaping issues as well when they go and down sample that? Like, how does that work?
Probably not. From 4X to 352, they're probably rolling off a fair amount of the noise shaping when they go to 352.8. Okay, when they go to DXD, which is, again, an internal process and should be pretty much lossless, other than that people just want to say that because it's PCM it's gone to shit, but it's just not the case. The noise band would be probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 kilohertz or above, and at 352 you're good to 176.4. So your noise is going to be filtered out by the anti-aliasing filter in the downsample.
Jamie, I want to ask you something else.
Yeah.
So there was an interview with Jim Davis, right, Stephen, from
yes,
MoFi?
Jim Davis is the owner of MoFi.
Yeah, and he stated in the interview with the Absolute Sound that they take the DSD files and they convert them back to analog, and they run them through an analog console and Tim Parravicini's tube EQ. So does that basically reintroduce any issues you'd be having in an analog domain?
I don't know.
Phasing, etc.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, again, I can't comment too much on what the accuracy or veracity of how well that was written down when he said it. You know what I mean? That's one of the things that I run into constantly, is that I'll say something and it'll go by fast. What I know, for example, that one of the things that Bob Ludwig and I talked about when we first were presenting this was that he did a lot of his equalization on the tape machine. He would observe the tones, and then he would, and I think righteously so, really smart, he would say, well, wait a minute, if there's something off, it's probably largely what I'm hearing in terms of the frequency response errors is probably the tones are off because the machine was off. Let me see if I can use the very same equalizers in the machine to fix that problem. So he starts there, and then he might go through an LA2A, or he might go through an EAR preamp, or I don't know, but he did do some stuff in advance of the digitization. We ran into this when we were trying to do an A/B test on some Queen stuff with them quite a while back, and we went direct from the tape right to our preamp, and we were comparing it to something where he had actually had an equalizer in the chain between his ATR and his digitization. So I don't know, when Davis says that, if they don't actually mean that they are going from Tim Parravicini's tape output through an equalizer and then onto the converter. If they were doing it the way that he described, then they are actually having to go out and do a D-to-A conversion and run it through the gear and then come back and do a second D-to-A to D conversion again. Okay. And that's I don't know. So I wouldn't want to have it out there that I said, oh no, that's stupid because they should have blah blah blah, because that's the kind of shit that just everybody goes nuts on. They find a small error on somebody else's part and they make a motion picture out of it. There are various ways of, some people do want to have a little bit of an analog lift between the tape machine and the digitization. In those circumstances, then we're happy to go there and put our preamp after whatever the chain is that they want to use. If that's the mastering guy's style, if that's his shit, I'm not getting in the way of that. But it does require an extra conversion step. Glasser used to do that on the Grateful Dead stuff. He doesn't anymore. He's all on the box now, but he used to have a couple of key components that he really, really loved, that he would go through another conversion step with his specific microsonics, which are really, really pretty hard to hear, so that he could get through some analog stuff and then come back in. But he doesn't do that anymore.
Stephen, you know what I realized? We forgot to tell people. So if somebody doesn't know what Jamie does, can you tell us in 1 minute what Plangent is?
Who, me?
Yeah, because I bet there's people that are watching this that don't.
Well, here's what I'll do for you, Jamie, because I know a lot of my viewers are going to say plangent processes. What the heck is that, right? And so basically, I mean, you can help me with this, but it's specialized playback system for magnetic tape and film, and it's a hybrid hardware and software package that combines state-of-the-art contemporary analog electronics coupled with unique digital signal processing. Is that pretty much what it said?
And what I love is the difference between bra and bro in America is the same distance between processing and processing in Canada. That's just awesome.
Us Canadians are very polite, though. It's a polite way to speak.
You know, it is a polite way to speak, and I'll tell you someday about the little old lady who at the crosswalk in Toronto wanted to let the guy that was in the car go in front of her, and he waved at her, and she waved at him, and he waved at her, and she waved at him, and then finally she said, "Well, fuck you," then, and she walked across the intersection.
Well, she was definitely an American then.
No, really. She was not actually. But anyway, I digress. That's what it is. Essentially, I came across a stupid Petrick a long time ago, which was that in a nutshell, people don't realize that the only thing, it's not just the audio that's recorded on the tape. In order to be able to make a highly linear recording, a low distortion recording, you actually have to get the magnets jumping around. You have to get them in motion. They want to stay static. You know, they're north-south, like you remember your Boy Scout compass. They want to stay north, they want to stay south, they want to stay north. There's a certain amount you know, they don't want to move, and then there's a flat top where the saturation is. So what the Germans and Marvin Cameras and a bunch of other guys discovered was that if you blasted the tape with like 80 kilohertz, 100 kilohertz at a really, really, really high level, it would excite all of the magnetic domains, so that when the audio came on, the audio could be actually very, very linearly imprinted. Otherwise, you're going to get a squarish sine wave. If you tried to just do it DC, 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 you were going to get nothing but that. So that's what bias is. All right, so bias is a word that everybody's heard from their cassette machines, blah, blah, blah. That's what it actually is it's an auxiliary oscillator within the machine that is blasting its output onto the tape at a very, very hot level, and it actually persists on the tape. It goes out of the record head along with the audio, and it was not thought to persist on the tape, and I'd heard it. I'd heard it when I was scrubbing 30 IPS. To find an edit, I'd hear, and I asked the guy what that is, and they said, that's the bias. That's the bias oscillator. I thought to myself, damn. That's a quartz oscillator in an MCI, by the way, or in a later Studer, or it's a signal core oscillator in one of the oldest Ampexes. That was a VHF, you know, transmitter from a transceiver walkie-talkie oscillator from the Pacific Theater. If those guys couldn't stay tuned into each other, if those things drifted, they died. So they were very, very stable oscillators. And what does that mean for us? That means that I can see exactly what the mechanical motion of the recorder and the playback machine were based on the variations that exist in that fixed signal. It went onto tape fixed with high precision, and then the motors and the bearings and everything else imprinted upon it their frequency modulation, their FM, their motion, their mechanical agitation is easily deduced from that. And those manifest obviously as pitch shifts or tempo shifts, and I said, well, oh, geez, if I've got a map of that, a perfect map of that, I could invert that in a pitch shifter using that as the guide for the pitch shifter. So basically what happens is when the machine wowed, the bias wows as well. I go, okay, what's the frequency of the bias at any particular moment? And that drives a pitch shifter that says, I'm going to do the opposite of that. And now I end up with something that has no speed variations in it at all, which actually turns out, if they're fast enough, they actually turned out to be distortion or modulation distortion.
So it's essentially micro speed corrections, correct?
Yes, it's micro speed. We can correct speed out to 4,000 parts per second down to 1 million parts per.
So let me also simplify this for some viewers who've never heard of the Plangent process. So again, we'll go back. You're capturing audio and the VHF signal from tape plangent, and then from there you're reducing the speed drift, the wow and flutter that happens. Is that really the big thing that happens?
Yes. And then there's this other subtle thing too, because a lot of people, we're very good at taking vinegar wowing mag film or something that's really obvious, and it's obvious in the test. And if we do a demo of something, we first show somebody something that sounds horrible and then we fix it. That's actually fairly easy to do. What's more precise, and Mike just spoke to this, is the micro timing stuff. If there's imagine a scenario where you have an A440 being played by a flute, 440 hertz, and the motor is actually cogging at 60 times a second, which it will do. It can't help it. 60 hertz in the States, in the Western Hemisphere, 50 overseas. So it's going to cog. So there's going to be a flutter that's not low enough that you actually pick it up as flutter, poetically flutter. It's going to actually show up as, you got A440. Now you have A440, and you have 380, and you have 500. You have these two outriggers that have nothing to do with the music. It's not 440 anymore. It's the sum and differences of 60 hertz. That's really hard to grab onto, but if you think about it, I put in 440, the motor did 60 times, and now I've got a beat frequency on either side of the original signal. Let's do that with every single thing that the machine does. The spindles, the bearings, the capstans, all of that stuff is always introducing that that kind of sideband distortion in there, and that's where the tape generation loss is. And that's why we make the claim, which we can back up, that even the finest masters that appear to have no problems in a gross wow or flutter circumstance, their distortion will drop by an order of magnitude, if not 2 orders of magnitude. So that's where.
Hey, Jamie. So between the big players, Ampex, Studer, and MCI, which machines did you find to be the best in speed stability when you listen to tapes?
Oh, this best for the speed stability. You know,
that required the least work.
The ones that require the least work, probably the ATR. The ATR is probably, the ATR, that particular one. And then there's 5 different flavors of Studer A80 that have varying amounts. And also it mattered how good the guy that was setting them up. I mean, if it was Paul Pristopino at Record Plant, he could take an Iowa, battery powered thing from back in the, he could make that work. So it depended a lot on the technique of the guy. The MCIs had a very, very complicated servo mechanism that was based basically on a modem. It was a 19.2 kilohertz modem, and it was really finicky. So I have seen things with the MCIs. The MCIs also tended to have bearing problems. This is something that I just got into with somebody the other day. It was like, oh, well, I saw MCI at the Classic Sound Signal. It was awesome. I was like, I used to service the damn things. The scrape idler flutter, we used to jitter around all over the place because they changed the needle bearing manufacturer that they were using, and that had a 300 hertz flutter on it because of the rotation of the spindle. So I could go on forever. Point of it is it's one thing, though, about the wow and the flutter. I want to say this, though, because the listeners must hear it from a perspective that they might be able to appreciate better than all the numbers. When I first demonstrated this at the AES, I happened to vaguely know Jim Keltner, Steely Dan drummer, very famous session drummer, and I ran into him on the show floor and I asked him to come over and take a listen. And he sat down and he listened and he said, "What do you got?" I said, "Well, I got America by Simon & Garfunkel. It's Hal playing." He said, "Oh, fuck, yeah, I got to hear Hal." So it's Let Us Be Lovers, oh man. It's all, and then, and walked off to look for America, right? And then he goes into a ride cymbal thing. The Greyhound in Pittsburgh, okay? And Keltner's like, play that again. So I played him the beginning and the after, and he says to me, how come Hal swings so much harder in yours than he does in the original? And it's because the motor stability. The motor stability in ours was rock solid, and he could hear it. He could hear it as a tempo pocket kind of a feel. The actual groove was stronger. When I went back and listened to it, he was absolutely right. It does rock harder. The Agnostic Front record is a perfect example of that because that's fast as hell and really precise. And it's, that's the thing we hear is that the performance boost. The performance is what was played. Before it was fucked with by the motions of the machines. And I get lost in the sauce about all the technical and the numbers and all this kind of stuff. The fact of it is, it feels more authentic, more authoritative. It's closer to what was in the control room. It buys you back a generation, 2 generations sometimes. And to the musicians that are our main customers, they're like, whoa, that's what we played. That's the session.
Here's a question for you. Some of your processes, your setups mostly for the Ampex, right? The ATRs. Have you developed any cards for the Studers to basically capture more UK, EU mastering?
We can do it on anything. We go to John French and if we run into a new machine that we haven't run into, we have a block for an A80. We have a block for an A10, A20. We have ATR blocks. If somebody was to come up and say, I have to use my Otari for whatever reason, I just call JRF and have them remount one of our heads on an Otari block and jump on a plane. The DSP is pretty much agnostic. The DSP can work with any of the brands or models out there, provided that there's a signal, and almost 98% of the time there has been.
So being a digital guy, I mean, I want to get back. I mean, we know the whole DSD debate with MoFi. Have you listened to any of the one steps? Do you have any? Do you
No.
At all? No. What are your thoughts, though, now that you've learned that they're using DSD before to basically to master and cut the lacquer? Like, how do you feel about that? Is it still as audiophile as it was prior to you not knowing they weren't using the masters?
Well, let me just say that feelings aren't facts. Okay, is
Okay.
one of my favorite statements, and I think there's an awful lot of people who feel betrayed or feel that they've been hornswoggled or whatever. Um, and I have a bipartite view of that. One is from a text standpoint, or from a informing your audience standpoint as to what's in print, as you say you're doing, is what you're writing out and telling them that you've done, or what the process is, which is part of their pitch. You know, they weren't telling this, they weren't telling the whole story. They absolutely were not telling the whole story.
And Jamie, they even called it Ultra Analog Game 2.
Yeah,
they had Ultra Analog.
For it. But you know, it's interesting. There was just recently, I was really kind of disappointed because I saw it in an interview that was just recently done, came into the last the July August Absolute Sound, and it went through a whole long thing about how the process is run. Didn't mention a digital step. So in the print part of it, let's just say in the print part of it, and in the heuristics of the epistemology, the knowledge surrounding what the audience's knowledge, what their customer base's knowledge is about the product, yeah, that's kind of disappointing. Where it gets dicey for me is I'm not really convinced that you can hear a DSD step. I don't know. I mean, I heard the merging technology. I know that's the one everybody's using is the Pyramix. And we tested it and didn't like it as much as we liked MyTech PCM. MyTech PCM was really fooling the shit out of us. I mean, we were going back and forth between a piece of Belden cable and a MyTech converter round trip, and we were like, wow, geez, this is brutal. It was the Brooklyn. The older MyTechs I could hear, but the newer ones, it really started to get difficult. And that was at 192 or at 384. So that's what we do. I can't say that I haven't actually heard. I have not heard of one step. I have heard the Howarth converters. There's nothing objectionable about them. It's not going to make you run screaming from the room with your hands over your ears. It's not going to destroy Michael Fremer's day. You know what I mean?
Let me ask you that. Michael Fremer, on his Tracking Angle Facebook page, he's doing an A/B challenge between DSD and Analog, and are you going to take him up on that offer?
Well, you know, between DSD and Analog is like what I said was like to him was I said let's test a switch. Let's just put the same audio on both sides of the switch and switch it back and forth and see if we hear it. Let's get that out of the way, and then do a round trip through any number of different converters if you want. I think it's tough that the only one that I know of that'll do 4x DSD is the Howarth, which does have as all electronics does, have a slight characteristic sound. I don't know that that's the digital. I would be surprised at all if that's choices that they made of an AD797 versus a 4562. You know what I mean? I don't know. You know, shit sounds different. All right. As I said, I didn't think I was going to run screaming from the room. We just did Who's Next, which is coming out not long from now, I hope, and it was done with a Pyramix converter. It sounded pretty damn good. We prefer the MyTechs. COVID wouldn't let us get over to London, so we used the Pyramix. So that having been said, I don't need to waffle on this. If you were to put together 5 different converters and a piece of wire on the other side of the switch and went back and forth between the two of them, if it was the experience that we had with the MyTechs, you would really have a hard time hearing it. If it was the experience that we had with the Pyramix, to then further assert that this was destroying the fidelity of the recording, I just laughed.
So I think mostly too, I mean, most of us that have, home stereo systems, I mean, not everyone has, $100,000 equipment, but just the basic, home stereo systems, I guess more upscale stuff. Do you think people can really tell the difference? I mean, if it was a DSD capture or DSD master, I mean, could they truly do it if they, with their equipment?
I don't know. And here's where I got jumped all over for having bias on the to make a bad pun, but on the Hoffman side, I just got beat up a little bit because I said, well, where I'm coming from, which is really all I want to speak to a lot of the time, because I don't want to talk about MoFi's having problems, and I feel bad for them. I said this in print. I said, look, I feel bad for them because I don't think that the end product sucks because of what they didn't tell everybody. And I really believe that. I don't think that the end product blows. Bernie Grumman and I and recently Mr. Botnick and Springsteen Camp did with Chris Bellman some of the stuff from our digitals. Neil Young is recently in the last year and a half has been bringing things to Grunman from our digitals because he believes, again, the performances are more solid. So there comes a situation where our method of digitizing and whatnot seems to have an advantage as much as the DSD step or the DSP step of the non-flutter reduction. It quite clearly offsets whatever's in the converter.
I'm going to give you a plug then, so the viewers know what what Plangent Processes have done lately and what you've engineered. Neil Young's Neil Young Archives from 2009, the box set there from what was it, 63 to 72. You did Young Shakespeare in 2021.
Correct.
Grateful Dead live at the Cow Palace 2007. And then I'm interested to talk about the Springsteen stuff that you did in 2015, the Born to Run. And Michael and I were talking about this before, the darkness of the edge of town and the river. So, I mean, that if my viewers want to know, 2015 is when that was released. So on Discogs, if you want some of Jamie's stuff, that's when those CDs are released. So can we talk more about Springsteen? I'm curious to hear about that.
Sure, that was a fun story. At the time, you mentioned Cow Palace and nobody mentions American Beauty and Working Man's Dead, which are the two classic titles, and David Crosby's If I Could Only Remember My Name. Those were the ones that they came out. And You Must Believe in Spring, which was Bill Evans and Al Schmidt, God bless, and
amazing recording, huh?
Oh yeah, and it's great. And you know what? We are so proud of that. And they went AAA through Kevin, and I have not heard Kevin's, and I'm sure it's wonderful because Kevin's really a really great knob twister. And his chain is fabulous, but we're extraordinarily proud of the work that we did on that because I think it sounds unbelievable. And I tell you what, the one thing you don't want to do is fuck up an Al Schmidt record.
Well, I also have the Crosby on order. I went and ordered the 50th anniversary double CD that you did because I have the MoFi recording, which we all found out was AAA. It's not a DSD mastering. So
that tape's in pretty good shape, and that tape sounds pretty good when you first put it up. Yeah, you could do a couple of quick clicks at a half a dB down at 30, and you'd probably have a pretty good sound on that tape. That thing's really, really damn good. And
well, I'll tell you, one of my better sounding MoFis is that title. I mean, it's a 45 RPM cut as well.
That's the same guy that did Steve Bonkart did the American Beauty record for them, and he also and he was basically the production supervisor. I mean, I initiated the project with Pat Milligan over at Rhino and bugged the shit out of him about wanting to do the Crosby record, but we got the tape. Botnick did the transfer. Actually, Bruce did the transfer for us, and we worked off of his digitization to my tech, and then went from there. And it's more stable. I mean, it's more live. A lot of that stuff is cut live. That's Phil Lasher, Jorma Kaukonen, and Jack Cassidy. It's a lot of live jamming, and you can hear the room, you can hear them. There's more of them there, and more of you hear Orléans with all those voices, and it's just got fucking Crosby's intonation. I mean, you just can't beat it.
Hey, Jamie,
back to the
question about
Springsteen
questions. Can I ask you, Born in the USA, was that a half-inch 30 IPS?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
I've seen that machine a bunch of times.
I wanted to ask you, I think I've discussed this with you on forums in the past. 1984, 85, it sounds like they turned the treble all the way up, the production quality of those years. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I do. And I know that when I was a kid in the 60s, that one of the things that my dad used to do was play bongos on top of his AR-3A. He'd put the needle on the record and the little, antique cabinet that he'd put all this shit in his Dynamp. And then he'd have a couple cocktails and play bongos on top of it because bass was like impossible to actually produce in the house until the KLHs and the ARs came along, and you could get a solid 60 hertz at least out of speakers. So the bass wars during the 60s were a big deal. I think when you got in the 70s and actually started having the advent of FM radio, you started having better car radio speakers in general, people became enamored with how much highs can you actually pour onto a tape. Right. So, and and this would not apply, as best as I can tell, this would not apply to the Springsteen stuff because those guys were pretty clean, I suppose, I'm told. But I know that on some of the LA records, one of the other things you're hearing is there's a lot of blow on those records. I mean, there's a lot of high blood pressure, and there's a lot of cranking, the monitors all the way up. And after a while, it gets brighter and brighter and brighter. And then you come back in the morning and go, what the fuck are we listening to? I don't know, master. Fuck it. It was a good mix last night. It'll be a good mix tonight. So there was a race, I think, back then to try to see how much high end. Also, the SX74 Neumanns. There were a lot of, and also 45 RPM dance records, which were done by Frankfurt Wayne in New York, and and I remember hearing a 45 RPM of What's Love Got to Do with It that I can't find any place. Everybody tells me it was a 33, but I remember a 45 test pressing that was just out of this world of the Tina Turner record. So there was a race back then for that super, super high end. And also that digital EMT 250 snare, which was, that was.
Can I also ask you about the River? I heard it was recorded on U-matic tape, digital, right? The River.
Well, actually, everything that was done at 1630 was done U-matic. One of the reasons you got 44.1 is because it divides into 525 and 15.750 very evenly.
So how did you do Plangent from a U-matic? How was that different?
I didn't. The River was done by Bobby Claremont and Analogue before they went back and reopened the record, and they bounced it to 3M digital and added more to it, and then Neil mixed it. I believe he mixed it to a Dash, Sony Dash, like just similar to Telegraph Road and all that stuff.
So what did they give you to work on? What did you use to do the River?
On what? On the River?
Yeah, what did you?
My tech converters and our preamp.
And what format did they deliver it to you in? What format was it?
It was quarter-inch. It's quarter-inch, and it had a monster edit in it that Bobby obviously didn't do. Somebody made an edit to splice something together, and it took me about 2 hours to find one place that the same bass note existed somewhere else, so I could graft in this 100 millisecond thing where the edit was too short because you could hear the tempo jumped across the edit, and that's what I remember about that one. It was good. It was more touching in a way. It was more demo-ish. It wasn't as polished as the final. It wasn't as slick as the final. But the River made me cry a little bit more because I think they were closer to the material. It was newer material, and Bob Claremont is a marvelous mixer, and I know for myself if I've mixed something 10 times, man, I go back to the first 2 times that I encountered it, and that's the one that makes me cry. So the beauty of that one was not whether it was analog or digital. The beauty of that one was that it was earlier in the arc of that project. That's the Ties That Bind box set, and that was a real surprise to get. I didn't even know it existed, but it's really pretty, and we're proud of that one too. Born in the USA is bright. Yeah, that's Power Station, dude. That's what we were all competing with. I was at Hit Factory, man. We were pouring 4 notches on a Neve 8078, just and burning the drapes off of the back of the room. Because that's what everybody else was doing, and again, you need extra top end to get to vinyl. You
know what they did at the end of each side? They'd put like My Hometown. They'd put the songs that had the least high end to get to the intergroups.
That's what you want to do. That it's where your velocities are the highest, and so your acceleration rates are the highest. That's one of the problems with A Day in a Life. A Day in a Life is actually, that must be a bitch to cut because it's got to be strong, and it's the end of the record, So,
gentlemen, we're going to wrap it up, but one question each. Michael, you got one more question to ask Jamie here before we wrap it up. What would you like to ask him?
One more question for Jamie. I do want to ask him something else that came into my head. There was an interview the Absolute Sound did with Jim Davis, and apparently it sounded like it was scripted questions that were answered. And he mentioned that part of the reason they use DSD is because every time there is a splice on a tape, they have to go back and readjust azimuth. And I haven't heard that before. What do you think?
It does happen sometimes. I mean, I assisted for Roy Howley for a week and a half, and I learned more in that time than I have lived than anybody else. And one of the things that Roy commonly did was he would record off a package to another 2-track machine and then fly it back into the master. And so when he would do that, there would be an area that he would rehearse and rehearse and rehearse until he got it the way he wanted it. And rather than wind back and forth on the machine, I would have stopped where he had finished doing his mix up to that point, and then he went and rehearsed this other section, and he picked that up and cut it in.
But if the tape was recorded on the same machine, all the tracks still recorded.
Every machine is slightly different. Every machine will be slightly different. Now, if it's on the same machine through the whole thing, we've seen azimuth change but typically it doesn't unless they actually were intercutting between two machines. That'll sometimes happen where you've got a segue too. Like for example, on Born to Run, it was Born to Run. Every single one of the songs on the original master goes all the way out until they stop playing, until the take falls apart, and the fades were put on by, I believe, by Ludwig at A&R. Or master disc, I forget which, but in any event, all of the fades are spliced on, and those were from a Scully. Actually, the main recording was done on an AG 440, but I could see right where the splice was that went to the fade. And the splice is inaudible. If you align your machines right, you're going to get away with it. And that's where the fade was, and that happened on every single cut. Except Meeting on the River, which faded out on its own across the river. So that's an answer on that. And yes, those did have to be done separately. There was a place in Candy's room where at the end of it, there was a sproing edit in there that blew the machine tape path off for the next 10 seconds, and we had to go back and repair the edit. That's typically more often what happens is it needs to, for us anyway, you repair the edit, make the edit clean, it'll flow through the machine cleanly, and then the machine doesn't stick at an azimuth that it was at a few minutes ago.
So my last question to wrap it up.
Yep.
So from all the CDs you've been part of, if you had to choose one for my viewers to go out and buy, because it was the best sounding one and you're most proud of, which one would you want them to go buy?
Which one?
One.
I sentimentally, I would say the Al Schmidt, because I love the guy, and also from the audio perspective, I think either American Beauty or the Crosby. I think they're both marvelous recordings, way ahead of their time. Baker's Dozen on HP for quite a while, if I remember correctly. The Crosby was. And one of the first CDs that he actually approved of, by the way, Harry Pearson did. And Harry Pearson had ears. So I can't give you just one, but that should be enough to give you a smattering of what to go for would be.
Well, yeah, no, because I want my viewers to basically go out and get some of these on Discogs. I mean, you look at David Crosby, they're not that much money if you buy them in the aftermarket right now. I mean, so I mean, it's some good deals out there for some of the stuff, for great sounding stuff.
Yeah, the 50th Rhino, I think, that's another thing that I just very, very editorially say. I think that a lot of the stuff is underpriced. And I know that's heretical, but I think that on some of the 50th anniversary type of things and whatnot, they're a little worried about where the price ceiling is. And really, the amount of effort and the amount of tech that you're actually getting on these things from either us or from the Mobile Fidelity or Chad, when I see somebody bitching about $1 here or $1 there, or this is $24.95 versus $32.95, I'm like, dude, you just don't know, You just don't know. I've spent hours and hours and hours on one song, and I've spent, way too much time and energy and money because of love of it. I won't ship it. I will not ship shit, And so getting something, in the aftermarket or in the afterlife, I don't give a fuck. It should cost what it costs to actually have the experience. And when I was a kid, I Will Follow Him by Little Peggy Marsh for 99 cents in 1962. And I'd buy the same record for exactly the same money now.
This has been fascinating, gentlemen. Jamie, I appreciate your time. Michael, I appreciate your time. I want to do this again at a later point, Jamie.
Okay. All right. You're happy to.
All right,
really,
gentlemen.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this has been great. Wonderful, and we'll talk again very soon. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thank you.